Hello everyone and welcome back to Mysterious Murmurs. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this. Story 1. The Shadow Beyond the Mirror. Mira was a quiet archivist in a small-town museum, content with her simple, orderly life. She had a knack for uncovering forgotten treasures hidden in dusty archives. One day, while cataloging artifacts from an old mansion, she stumbled upon an ornate antique mirror wrapped in layers of velvet. A note accompanied it. "Do not awaken the shadow." Intrigued by its craftsmanship, Mira decided to bring the mirror home to research its origins. Its frame was intricately carved, depicting serpentine figures and hollow-eyed faces that seemed to watch her every move. Despite the warning, her curiosity won over caution. Strange things began happening as soon as the mirror was hung in her hallway. Mira noticed her reflection lingered for a second longer than it should, almost as if the other Mira was watching her closely. Sometimes, shadows danced in the reflection, even though the room was brightly lit. One night, while brushing her hair, Mira saw something impossible. Her reflection smiled back at her, while her own face remained neutral. She froze, her pulse quickening. The reflection leaned closer to the mirror and whispered, "Let me in." Terrified, Mira covered the mirror with a sheet. But the disturbances only grew worse. She started hearing whispers at night, calling her name. Lights flickered, objects moved, and a cold presence loomed in her once cozy home. Desperate, Mira delved into the history of the mirror. She discovered it once belonged to a reclusive alchemist who dabbled in forbidden rituals, using the mirror as a gateway to another realm. The shadow in the note referred to an entity trapped in the mirror, an entity that fed on fear and sought freedom. Mira decided to confront the mirror. Armed with candles, salt, and an ancient banishment ritual she found in her research, she uncovered the mirror and stared into its depths. The reflection grinned again, but this time it wasn't her face, it was the shadow's. As the ritual began, the shadow grew agitated, pounding against the glass, trying to break through. The room grew colder, and the lights shattered one by one. Chanting louder, Mira poured salt around the mirror and lit the candles, creating a barrier. The entity screamed, a sound so chilling it felt like it could shatter her soul. With one final chant, the mirror cracked, and the shadow let out an ear-piercing wail before vanishing into the void. The room fell silent, the air heavy with finality. Though the mirror was destroyed, its frame remained intact. Mira buried it deep in the forest, vowing never to speak of it again. Her life returned to normal, but every now and then, she'd catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of her eye and wonder, had she truly banished it? Story 2. The Vanishing Village. Ethan was a travel photographer who thrived on discovering hidden gems. One day, while reviewing maps in an old library, he came across a hand-drawn chart with the name of a village that didn't exist on any modern map, Elder's Hollow. Intrigued, he decided to track it down. After days of searching, Ethan found himself on a narrow, overgrown path leading to a secluded area. As he reached the end of the trail, the village appeared, quaint cottages, cobblestone streets, and a heavy silence hanging in the air. The place felt untouched by time, as if it had been frozen for centuries. The villagers were warm but strangely distant. They welcomed him with smiles that didn't reach their eyes and spoke in hushed tones. "Few travelers find their way here," one old man said. "It's best not to linger after dark." Ethan began exploring, photographing the eerily perfect surroundings. He noticed peculiar details. Every clock in the village was stuck at 11:59, and no one seemed to cast a shadow. At dusk, the atmosphere shifted. The villagers retreated to their homes, locking their doors. One woman urgently whispered to Ethan, "Leave before midnight. You don't belong here." Ignoring the warnings, Ethan decided to capture the village under the moonlight. As the clock struck midnight, an eerie fog rolled in, blanketing the village. The once charming cottages began to deteriorate before his eyes. Roofs crumbled, walls cracked, and the cobblestone streets seemed to sink into the earth. Stranger still, the villagers began to transform. Their eyes turned hollow, their skin translucent, and they moved with an unnatural stillness. Ethan's camera captured horrifying figures standing in the shadows, staring directly at him. He ran to his lodging, but the door wouldn't open. A chilling voice echoed in the fog. "You've seen too much. Now you're one of us." Desperate to escape, Ethan remembered the map he had found. It mentioned an ancient well in the heart of the village that was said to connect to the outside world. Clutching his camera, he sprinted toward the well, dodging ghostly figures that reached for him with cold, skeletal hands. The well was surrounded by glowing runes, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. Ethan leaned over, and just as one of the ghostly villagers grabbed his arm, he leaped into the darkness. The fall felt endless, but he eventually landed in a soft bed of moss. He was in the forest, miles away from Elder's Hollow. His camera was intact, but the images were all blank, except for one. A single photo of a decayed village with spectral figures watching from the fog. Ethan tried to return to Elder's Hollow, but the path had vanished. No one he told about the village believed him. Yet, every time he looked at that one haunting photo, he felt their eyes on him, as if they were waiting for him to return. Story 3, The Staircase That Never Ends. Lila, an aspiring urban explorer, discovered an abandoned mansion in the outskirts of town. The locals avoided it, claiming it was cursed, but her curiosity drove her to investigate. The mansion was vast and decayed, with rooms full of cobwebs and forgotten relics. As she wandered deeper, she found a spiral staircase in the center of the house. It was unusual, extending both upwards and downwards into darkness. A sign beside it read, "Choose your path wisely, for only one leads back." Intrigued, Lila decided to descend. At first, the steps seemed normal, but after a few minutes, she realized she wasn't getting any closer to the bottom. The staircase seemed endless, and the air grew colder with each step. Shadows began to form on the walls, shifting and twisting as if alive. Whispers surrounded her, voices pleading, warning, and mocking. Panic set in, but when Lila tried to climb back up, she found herself right where she started, still on the staircase. She noticed carvings on the walls, names etched in desperation, all followed by dates spanning centuries. It became clear that the staircase was a trap, and she wasn't the first to be caught. Determined to escape, Lila used her camera's flash to light her way. The shadows recoiled from the light, revealing symbols etched into certain steps. Following the pattern, she climbed higher, ignoring the voices urging her to descend further. Finally, a faint light appeared above her. Gathering all her strength, she sprinted upward. As she reached the top, she was pulled through a blinding flash and found herself outside the mansion, gasping for air. The mansion was gone, replaced by an empty field. In her camera, Lila found a single image, a spiraling staircase vanishing into blackness, with a shadowy figure standing at the bottom, staring back at her. Story 4, The Forgotten Key. Beginning, while renovating her late grandmother's house, Emma found a rusty key hidden inside an old music box. The key was unlike any she had seen, with intricate patterns and an inscription that read, "Unlock and remember." Her grandmother had often spoken of a secret door in the house that no one had ever found. Intrigued, Emma began searching for hidden panels and compartments. Eventually, she discovered a small, concealed door in the attic. Middle, the key fit perfectly, and the door creaked open to reveal a narrow passage. At the end of the passage was a room untouched by time. A single chair sat in the center, surrounded by mirrors on all sides. As Emma stepped inside, the door slammed shut. The mirrors reflected not only her, but scenes from the past. Her grandmother as a young woman, arguing with a shadowy figure. The figure seemed to notice Emma and turned toward her reflection with glowing red eyes. A voice echoed in the room. "You've entered a memory that doesn't belong to you." Climax, Emma tried to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The shadow in the mirror began to emerge, its form twisting and writhing as it approached. Emma realized the key was the only way out. She held the key tightly and shouted, "I remember!" The mirrors shattered, and the room dissolved into light. Emma woke up in the attic, clutching the key. Ending, the secret room was gone, but Emma felt a deep connection to her grandmother, as if she had preserved a memory that wasn't meant to be lost. She locked the key away, vowing never to use it again. Story 5, The Library of Lost Souls. During a backpacking trip, Sam stumbled upon a decrepit library in the middle of the woods. Its sign read, "Enter to find what you've lost." Unable to resist, he stepped inside. The library was massive, with shelves that stretched infinitely upward. The air was thick with the smell of old books, and whispers seemed to emanate from the walls. Sam wandered through the aisles, each book titled with a person's name and a date. He found a book with his own name and pulled it off the shelf. As he opened it, the pages began to write themselves, detailing every moment of his life. Suddenly, the book stopped writing and turned blank. A voice behind him whispered, "You've reached your end." Sam spun around to see shadowy figures closing in. Realizing the library was a trap, Sam tried to escape, but the shelves shifted, forming an endless maze. The shadows grew closer, their whispers turning to screams. Sam found a desk with an empty journal and a pen. Remembering the sign outside, he wrote down a single word: freedom. The walls trembled and the shadows recoiled. A door appeared at the end of the aisle. Sam ran through it, emerging back in the forest. The library vanished, but Sam kept the journal. It now wrote down his future, a haunting reminder of the choices he had yet to make. Story 6, The Haunting of Blackwood Hotel. Darren was a travel blogger, always on the hunt for unique, offbeat locations. One day he came across a review of the Blackwood Hotel, a mysterious, century-old inn nestled deep in the mountains. The reviews described it as charmingly eerie, with whispers of ghostly encounters that fascinated him. Darren, always up for an adventure, decided to book a room. The hotel was a towering Gothic structure, its dark stone walls looming ominously against the misty landscape. As Darren checked in, the receptionist, an older woman with sharp eyes, handed him a brass key. "Room 512, she said before pausing. "Avoid room 616. It's locked for a reason." Intrigued, Darren smirked but nodded. He carried his luggage up the creaky staircase, the dim light casting long shadows along the walls. The hallways smelled faintly of lavender and something metallic, like old coins. Room 512 was modest, with antique furniture and a faint, musty smell. As he unpacked, Darren couldn't shake the thought of room 616. Why was it forbidden? What secrets did it hold? That night, Darren explored the hotel, hoping to uncover its history. The hallways were lined with faded photographs of past guests, their eyes seeming to follow him as he walked. A particularly large painting caught his eye. It depicted a grand ballroom filled with dancers. Oddly, the faces of the people in the painting were blurred, and the figures closest to the edges seemed to fade into shadows. Darren asked the receptionist about the hotel's history. She hesitated before answering. The Blackwood Hotel has seen many visitors over the years. Some chose to stay longer than others. When pressed about room 16, she grew visibly uncomfortable. "That room is not meant for guests. Leave it be," she said firmly before walking away. That only fueled Darren's curiosity. Later that night, armed with his camera and a flashlight, he ventured to the 6th floor. The hallway was darker than the rest of the hotel, the air heavy and cold. He found room 616 at the end of the corridor. The brass doorknob was tarnished, the numbers on the plaque slightly crooked. Ignoring the warnings, Darren jiggled the handle, but it was locked. Just as he turned to leave, he heard a faint sound, like someone whispering his name. He froze, turning back to the door. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. Ignoring the warnings, Darren jiggled the handle, but it was locked. Just as he turned to leave, he heard a faint sound, like someone whispering his name. He froze, turning back to the door. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a flickering chandelier. It was lavish, far more extravagant than his own room, with velvet drapes, gilded mirrors, and an ornate four-poster bed. But something was off. The mirrors reflected shadows that didn't match the room's contents, and the air was stifling, carrying a scent of decay. As Darren stepped further in, the door slammed shut behind him. He turned, heart pounding, but the handle wouldn't budge. The whispers returned, this time louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices. "Help us. You shouldn't be here. Run before it's too late." Darren's flashlight flickered, and the room seemed to stretch and twist, the walls pulsating as if alive. He stumbled backward and bumped into a tall, gilded mirror. The glass rippled like water, and suddenly, he wasn't alone. A figure emerged from the mirror, tall and gaunt, its eyes hollow and glowing faintly. Its presence was suffocating, an overwhelming sense of dread washing over Darren. "You ignored the warnings," it hissed, its voice a blend of countless tones. "Now you'll join the others." The The walls of the room dissolved, revealing a vast, dark void filled with faint, flickering lights. Darren realized with horror that the lights were souls, trapped and crying out for release. The figure reached for him, its bony hands stretching impossibly long. Desperate, Darren remembered the camera slung around his neck. He raised it and snapped a photo. The flash illuminated the room briefly, and the figure recoiled, shrieking in rage. He used the distraction to fumble with the door. This time it opened. Darren bolted out, running down the hallway as the whispers turned into angry wails. He didn't stop until he was outside the hotel, gasping for air. The next morning, Darren returned to the hotel, only to find it abandoned. The grand structure was now in ruins, overgrown with ivy and surrounded by silence. Confused, he checked his camera. The photos he had taken of the hotel were gone, replaced by images of a dark void filled with flickering lights and a single shot of the gaunt figure staring directly at him. Darren never spoke of his experience, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something from room 616 was still watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike again.